A story manifests itself in a personality, in a set of goals and a set of assumptions about the world, perceptions about the world. And if you have had terrible things happen to you in the past, and that's pretty much true of everyone, although some people more than others, then your body computes the present danger of the environment based on how many things have happened to you that are terrible in the past that aren't resolved. And resolved would mean that you had generated a solution for them. And if your psychophysiological system assumes that all the danger that you were subject to once is still present in the environment, then it's going to set you on edge as if you're walking in dangerous territory. And the psychophysiological consequence of that is that you're prepared for danger, and that does such things as burn up excess resources because you're much more reactive and on point than you might otherwise be in an anxiety-prone manner. It also suppresses immunological function because your body isn't that worried about long-term immunological health if you're confronting an emergency. And so changing your past, owning your past, and it's useful to define that. You're likely to overcome a trauma, let's say, and no longer, in some sense, store it psychophysiologically if you've generated a causal story about the reason that the trauma emerged and then reconfigured the way that you're conducting your life so that the probability that a similar thing will happen to you is reduced to close to zero. Right? It's not catharsis,
right.
It's understanding. Yeah. The thing about memory is that it's not there to provide an accurate, objective record of the past, which is in fact impossible because the past is so unbelievably complex. It's more like a navigation tool, which is I went here, I fell into something terrible, and now I need to recalibrate the navigation map that I'm using so that I don't fall into the same hole. And one of the things that people might want to know, that if you have a memory that's older than about 18 months and it haunts you, and when it comes up involuntarily, it produces a stress reaction. What that means is that as far as your nervous system is concerned, and so as far as your body's concerned, that danger hasn't gone away. And what's happening is an unconscious alarm system that's looking for pitfalls and holes is warning you that the map that you're using is incomplete in a manner that might enable you to fall into the same hole. And so one of the things that people can do that's very useful is, if you have memories like that plague you, is to bring them to mind voluntarily instead of waiting for them to come after you involuntarily, and then to think through what has changed and what might not have, but also to come up with a plan so that if a similar circumstance arose, you'd be in a better position in one way or another to deal with it. There's no other way of getting the memory to go away. Like merely recontemplating it in the same manner over and over won't do it. And allowing it to plague you unconsciously, it'll do that forever until you solve it. It might show up in your dreams, it'll show up in your fantasies, it'll trigger you, so to speak, when you're talking to other people if they happen to discuss a topic that's related to it. And it's because that the narrative is one of failure and defeat. The event was one of failure and defeat, and if there isn't a map to allow you to transcend that's functional, then the part of your brain that is concerned with identifying danger is never going to let you go. If you run, then the signal that the story you're acting out is that the thing you're running from is bigger than you and that you have to hide. And that's just a recipe for anxiety. Now, it's not necessarily that easy to turn and face something. You can differentiate the problem. Like you might have been traumatized at work, let's say, or let's not use that sort of jargony phraseology. You may be having tremendous difficulties at work. You might be dealing with people who are tyrannical at work and find it very meaningless. And that's bothering you constantly. It's disturbing your sleep, for example, and it's haunting you. And you tend to try to push it out of your mind when the thoughts come. And partly that's because the thought of getting a new job is so daunting that you can't face it. And one of the ways of recalibrating that is to break down the problem into small and manageable steps. And so, for example, one of the things that you can do if you might have to consider getting a new job because you're unhappy and miserable at work, is open up your resume or your CV and look at it, right? So you might not be able to get a new job, but you might be able to open up your resume and look at it. And then having done that, you've sort of cracked the surface, and then maybe you could spend an hour a week for a month updating it, or 10 minutes a day, or 10 minutes every 2 days, something like that. But part of the trick is to take these larger monsters that are frightening enough so you want to run away from them, decide that you're going to face the situation. You know, one of the things I found in my practice was that this is useful for people who are trying to embark on an intimate relationship, is you need to talk to your wife about the domestic economy and the practicalities of your life together for about 90 minutes a week. And you need to date at least once a week for that length of time, or maybe twice if you can manage that. And if you don't do that, you will become isolated and lonely, and you'll develop a backlog of communication. And if you don't fix that, you'll end up divorced, and then you'll be fixing it for the rest of your life. You can have a preliminary conversation with your partner, let's say, and say something like, look, we need to tell each other what we need and want. And we're both too stupid to do that because we have almost no practice at it. And worse, here's something about that that's really quite sad and frightening, is like, you know, if one of the things you wanted to hear is that your wife was grateful to you for, let's say, providing properly for the family, so say proud of you, there's a part of you that's quite insecure that wants that message, and you're vulnerable on that point, hey? And so then if you share that vulnerability, the person with whom you're sharing it knows exactly where to stick you if they want. And so it takes real trust to do that. But the alternative is assuming that, and people do this all the time, they'll say things like, well, if you loved me, you'd know what I wanted. It's like, well, first of all, that's a pretty perfect love. Well, right, well, you're not even smart enough to do that for yourself most of the time. You know, you can make an agreement with your partner and say, look, here's something I'd like to hear you say. And here's the words I'd like to hear. Will you just say that? Another person might object and they'll say, well, that sounds false if I do it, or it won't be real because we're just practicing it and it's artificial. And then you think, well, wait a second. We're going to be together for the next 10,000 days. And if it takes 20 stupid practices to get it right, that's not so much stacked up over 10,000 days.